Okay.
Somewhere on the syllabus, I do believe it says the meeting minutes are due on Wednesdays, by the way. But you take them on Mondays, right?
Monday or Wednesday's fine. Or you can put them in my box, yeah.
Yeah? Oh, okay.
As long as I get them this each week, I don't care, yeah.
Oh, got it. Okay. Yeah, I want to get something new.
I'm not entirely sure it's the data, but
I don't know either. Oh, yeah?
black mold. Yeah, definitely.
I'm not.
Times this.
Yeah. I've just been traveling this weekend and Scotland. Just dead tired. I feel like I might get sick.
I get that. What were you traveling for?
I was getting Alien Part 1 competition, and I wanted to use it.
That's super awesome.
It was a good time.
So you know they had a competition.
I actually had to miss another competition to do that too, because they're on the same day.
It's quite a few.
Most of them are in LA. Parkour, it's a started as a French military discipline, but isn't defined as moving efficiently through an urban environment. Basically, like guys that like to.
All right, we're gonna get started. All right, I'm recording. We're gonna start. All right, so I moved the schedule around a little bit. It's okay if you didn't read this yet. I understand. It's not a big deal. Because I need to cover some material before I go out of town. And it's very important, and it will actually let you get started on some of the project work that we couldn't start on yet. Okay. So today we're going to talk about information systems development and project management. And then on Wednesday, we're going to talk about enterprise systems. We'll cover the e-commerce stuff, websites, while I'm out of town, because that's something easy for me to do that's not as difficult. The stuff you'll probably have a lot of questions about. Okay. So we'll cover that other stuff while I'm out of town. But we're going to do IS development and project management today, and I'll show you two different project management techniques, an operations management technique, and then we'll talk about things around information systems development as well. Okay, that will allow you to do the user stories and the project plan piece of the project. Okay, once we talk about it today. All right. Now, let's start off with. We're going to talk about. So Agile is what I'm going to talk about first. Then we'll talk about waterfall project management, which will lead us into development. And then we'll end up with a little bit on emerging trends in this area. Okay. And we're going to do an in-class exercise. I also added a few more times where we're going to do in-class exercises, or you're going to have time to work on your project in class. Okay. So hopefully you take advantage of that time, and then you'll have less stuff to do outside of class. Okay. We will be doing on Wednesday of next week. So Monday we don't have class. I know it's not technically a holiday here, but I realized it's too late and I already told you guys you had it off, so I don't think it's fair for you to tell you have to come to class. Okay. But Wednesday, we're gonna do an in-class assignment called the briefcase scenario. Okay, we're gonna do that twice in this class. Okay? I get funny looks from people about that. I will explain that in a second. So the briefcase interview, it's basically a technique that's in interviewing, but it's actually useful for careers in IS or IT. It's a troubleshooting exercise. You're going to be given a scenario that you have to troubleshoot as a group, a small group. It doesn't have to be your regular group, by the way. It can just be a couple people working together. I don't care. But you're going to work through the scenario and figure out how you would address that particular scenario. You don't need to find the answer to the solution. It's more about how do you arrive at a conclusion of where you would solve this problem. Okay? Not so much whether the conclusion's correct. We're going to do that twice. So the first time we'll have an easy scenario. The second time we do it in a few weeks, we'll actually have a pretty difficult scenario. And this helps to build your critical thinking, analytical reasoning, and troubleshooting skills. Okay? All key things in this field, by the way. So for today, we're going to start off with Agile. Okay? Who here knows what Agile is? All right, you get to teach the class today.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Oh, you've heard it, okay.
That's all I know.
I when I did this, I used the same slides for a grad class a couple weekends ago, and there was a guy in the class who actually probably knew a lot more about it than me because they're a Scrum Master. Okay, but we'll talk about Agile today. Agile is a way that we can deliver software, and we can use it for other purposes, not just software. Okay? But this is where it kind of developed from, was software. We can develop quickly, we continuously develop that software, and we can rapidly provide new solutions to our customers. So our customers are very happy because we can quickly deliver when they ask for something. So let's use an example. Let's say we're using, okay, nobody here uses Facebook, right? Okay, we've got a few people. Most people don't anymore for some reason. I haven't for years, but let's say Facebook gets an idea for a new feature. You know, Zuck decides he's got a new idea for a feature. And he goes to the development team and he says, I want to add this new feature to Facebook, okay? With Agile, they could get it in as soon as 2 weeks, maybe even sooner. Okay? If they went waterfall, which is the older method of project management, it might be 6 months to a year before they ever can get that into the product. So Agile allows us to move more rapidly, hence the name. It also is great for when the requirements may change all the time. So let's say we're a startup and we built a new product. We don't quite know what our target customer is or what they want. So we can add enhancements based on requirement changes along the way. We launch our product and nobody uses our product, so we change it. Right? We can change those requirements frequently. Also with Agile, our developers and the business folks, so folks in finance and marketing and everything else, we all work very collaboratively every single day. Right? It's not development goes off for 6 months and does something. We all work very closely together on an ongoing basis. Projects tend to form around individuals with Agile, so 5, 6, 7 of you might get together and start working on a project. There's no formality around it. There's not a formal project manager who's assigned to the project. Most internal projects these days in IT organizations that are kind of ad hoc, they form around a need, they don't have a formal project manager. Usually you can't, if let's just say this group of individuals here in these first 2 rows, they decide, they find a need in the organization and they want to move forward with it. With Agile, you don't have to go get formal sponsorship, hire a project manager. You can just start working together, okay? And someone on the team is a Scrum Master. It's kind of like the project manager, but not exactly, okay? It's more of a democratic process where you're all equals. The Scrum Master is just the person who keeps things going and organizes things. Okay, it's much less formal. There's a focus on excellence with Agile, and it's a focus on continuous improvement. Okay? This happens very frequently. Let me get into that. So with Agile, we call it Scrum. Okay, so Agile Scrum, and with an Agile Scrum, we have the Scrum Master who kind of manages the day-to-day for each iteration. Each iteration is called a sprint. Okay? Just like you run a sprint, you might run a sprint on a track and field team or something like that. Okay? It's generally a very short distance, okay? And you go very fast, as opposed to say a marathon or a triathlon where you're trying to pace yourself over the longer term. Okay? And you have to practice and practice and practice. Sprints are generally 2 weeks. They can be longer, they can be shorter, but generally speaking, they're about 2 weeks. Okay? Less than 2 weeks is a little short, longer than 2 weeks is too long. So for your teams, I'm gonna tell you what you're gonna do. You're gonna do a little out of the ordinary for this class because we only have a semester together, okay? So if we did every 2 weeks, it wouldn't be very effective for your team, okay? We have too many things that are gonna do. So your teams are gonna do 1 week sprints, okay? What's going to happen is you're gonna decide as a group, let me stop here for a second. You have a choice of either Agile or Waterfall, okay? And I'll explain Waterfall a little later. To give you a basis of comparison, I have 300 students at UCR, and every single team chose Agile. But you're welcome to choose Waterfall. The problem with Waterfall for this class is you have to plan everything up front. You may not know the answers to everything up front. Okay? So you probably want to go the Agile route, but you can decide. Just don't mix the two up. Every semester I have people who confuse Agile and Waterfall and put them together. If you're doing Agile, you don't do any of the Waterfall stuff. If you're doing Waterfall, you don't do any of the Agile stuff. Okay? They're completely different methodologies. You start off by planning. So you decide what's the start of your week and what day is the end of the week. Okay? At the start of the 2 week period, you do what's called a planning session. You get together and you plan out the work for the next 2 weeks. Okay? Or in your case, 1 week. And then you have daily stand-up meetings. Now, I don't require that you meet daily. What I do require is that you give each other an update daily through Slack or some other mechanism, whatever you've chosen to communicate with. Okay? And so what you're going to do in that, and I actually am going to try something new today. So I have this board, this whiteboard thing, and we will use this today. I will share it with all of you, don't worry. I use this in my other classes. Okay. So in theory, see if we can get it to work here. Is the internet really slow for you guys? Maybe it's just Slack. It must be Slack. It's taking forever to load. If you don't have your minutes, by the way, you can leave them in the box outside my office, or you can bring them on Wednesday. Okay, so hopefully it. Okay, I just posted in general this link. If you go to this link, you should, in theory, be able to see my screen that I will pull up here as well. There's nothing on it yet, but there will be in a second. We'll use it in class today. So all of you can go to this from your web browser, the link that I posted in Slack, or there's a mobile app. You don't need to sign up for an account though. You can just access the link. Okay, allows you to see what's on the screen closer to you, so you don't have to zoom in with your phone from afar. Okay, you can't see it. Okay, so in your daily stand-ups, what you're going to do is you're going to ask and answer 3 questions for each one of you. Okay? So each one of you will answer, what did you do, I'll move that down, yesterday. Now that's the first question. What did you do yesterday? What will you do today? And am I blocked on anything? These are the 3 questions that you ask in your stand-up. Now, you don't need to have an actual stand-up meeting, as I said. You can do this Slack, text, email, however you prefer, okay? But every day, that's the questions you're going to answer. Okay? Someone's going to be responsible for capturing those for each person on the team, okay? And at the end of the week, you're going to do what's called a retrospective, which is the next step in the process, okay? So let me go back to the slides and I'll show you the next step. So the next step is, oops. So you did the planning, you decided what you're going to work on for your sprint, which in your case will be 1 week. Your stand-up is just going to be reporting your daily status to each other, okay? The stand-up, by the way, in a real meeting for a real business would be less than probably 5 minutes for everybody. It's called a stand-up because everybody stands up. Nobody sits down, takes a seat in the conference room. You just all stand up. It's sometimes called a huddle, okay? Now, you're going to do your stand-up meetings. I know you're all students, you're all very busy, have jobs and everything else. So just do it through some sort of asynchronous mechanism. Whatever you want to do with them. Right? At the end of the week, you do what's called a retrospective. Now, for the retrospective, you could do this asynchronously as well. You don't have to meet. For the planning session, you really do need to meet, and you do your meeting minutes anyway. So I would just do it during your normal meeting time. But your retrospective is just a reflection point for the works or the week's worth of work that you've done. Right. So you're going to look at what was accomplished by the whole team, and you're going to capture that. What did the whole team accomplish? I don't care, for the purposes of the project plan of the project, I don't care about individual contributions. Right? It's for your own use. Right? The team report. So when you report for that project plan, for the project, you shouldn't have Johnny did X, Sally did Y. It should be, these are the things that our team accomplished during sprint 1, which was this week. These are the things that we accomplished in sprint 2, which was this week. Okay? You can just number your sprints starting with probably this week would make sense. Sprint 1, and that if you're doing agile, if you're doing waterfall, you can ignore all this stuff, but you probably want to learn it regardless. Now, in addition to what did you work on, what were some things you can improve? So let's say during the first sprint, Johnny's got a big ego, and Johnny thinks he can get a lot of stuff done. Okay, so Johnny says he's going to get 10 things done, and he gets 5 things done. What did we learn as a team then? We learned that we probably need to be better as a team about estimating our work, of what we can reasonably get done. So the hope is in the next sprint, we actually are a little bit more sensible about how much we commit to. Okay? We improve our team. By the end of the class, you should really have it down in terms of planning your work, working together as a team, and hopefully this will help in your other classes when you have to start doing some pretty substantial projects. Okay? So that's what you do in the retrospective is you just look back at the previous week, or in real world it'd be 2 weeks. Now, burn down's another thing that's associated with Agile. Now, we are not going to do that in this class, but this is what burn down looks like. So you are not required to do burn down. Really what you're supposed to do for those of you who are doing Agile, you are basically going to do document your planning for each week, document your retrospective, document the accomplishments, okay? Document improvements that you and areas for improvement, those types of things, okay, for each week. The other thing that you're going to do, and I'll show you in a little bit, is called a Kanban board. Has anybody heard that before? Okay. We can thank Toyota for that. They came up with that. I will show you an example. You can do it in software, you can do it on a whiteboard and take a picture of it, okay? I recommend just using software. It's a heck of a lot easier, and you're not having to worry about redoing it every time you meet, okay? Especially if you're virtual, it will help you out. But let me show you burn down first. You don't have to do this, but I think it's important for you to understand what this is. Okay. So let's go ahead. You'll be able to go to that link and print off or at the very least, screenshot everything from the whiteboard when I use this. Okay. All right, so burn down looks like this. So here's a graph. Okay. And we start off when we commit at the beginning of the week. Since we're doing 1 week sprints, let's just say beginning of week and end of week. Okay. We commit to a bunch of things. Okay. So this is what we commit to doing, this much work. Okay. And over time, we burn down that list to hopefully get down to 0 by the end of the week. But the reality is, as we're doing the work, new things will come in. So we'll start off there, and maybe we'll go down like this. Okay? But then something will happen, and we'll get more work. Okay? And that will happen over time, and then eventually we'll end up with 0. Our burn down is this rate over time. Okay, this is burn down. But you do not need to worry about this, okay, for this class. But just know that in a real agile environment, you would have a tool and you would track this for your management. And your management's going to know what the velocity is of burning down your task over a sprint. Because you can see early on if you're falling behind, which means you know that the project's off track and you have to figure out how to get it back on track. That's one of the benefits of agile is you don't have to wait to the end to know that there's a problem. You'll know every single day if there's a problem. That's why we ask that question of what are the issues? What are the blockers? Yes?
So to what extent, how much time do you spend estimating how long tasks are going to take relative to each other? Is that something you figure out in the first?
So usually when you get tasks, we're going to talk about user stories today too. So a user story is a very small unit of tasks. So when you start off, and I will get into this a little later in more depth, but you start off and you start thinking about what are the activities of tasks. Those are stories. But you might get into a task and you might think it's a story, which is supposed to be work that you can perform within a sprint.
Yep.
Now let's just say, let's use an example from our own frame of reference here, right? We're going to make an enhancement to the registration system for crashing courses, right? We initially anticipate it's going to be work that we can complete in a sprint, but as we get through the sprint, we realize we were not correct, right? We can take that story, which is technically then an epic, because an epic is bigger than a story. It's kind of like in a world, that guy, right? An epic's a big thing, right? We break it down into stories, but sometimes we think it's a story, but as we dive deeper into it, we realize that we were wrong and it was actually an epic. Right? Epics, we don't necessarily know all the details yet. So what we'll do is we'll delay an epic. We'll make it a lower priority until we can figure out the stories associated with the epic. Then we'll start working on the stories, and when we get all the stories done, then that epic gets closed as well. It's kind of like a parent-child relationship, if you look at it that way. So, I will go into that when we go into stories here in a little bit. So this is a burn down. You don't need to do this for this class. So really for this aspect of the project, where's it at here? What I'm referring to when I talk about the project, I'm referring to in the experiential learning. Okay. You do this in experiential learning, but the project plan and the user stories are the things that we're going to work through today. Okay.
Do those go like together, or is it kind of separate?
There's separate things, but you probably would work on them in close succession from one another. You probably do the project, start the project. If you're doing Agile, you're going to be doing the project work every single week until you get to the point where it's due, and then you're going to have to just freeze it, and that's done, and then put that into your document. The user stories, you could probably get that done pretty quickly if you just spent a couple of days, a week working on it and divided it up amongst your team, equal number of stories per person. You could probably blast through that in a couple of days, working maybe an hour a day for each person, if even that. Okay. The details are down here. You're going to create a project plan in either Waterfall or Agile. Okay. How you do that? Agile, I've told you how already. Waterfall, I'll tell you, but only if anybody wants to do it after I explain Waterfall. I would be very surprised if anybody wants to do Waterfall, but we'll see. Okay. The 30 user stories are you're going to pick, based on the hypothetical, you're going to pick what types of information systems you want to write the user stories about. You can write about one system, you can write about many systems. Okay? But just remember, a user story is a very specific item. Okay? It's not for all the systems. You'll have a user story for each system. You'll have a lot of them actually for each system. So you can decide to work on HR, finance, marketing, or all of the above. With 30 stories, that's not very many. Once I explain what a story is, you'll say, oh my gosh, Professor, this is the easiest assignment in the class, because it really is. Right? It is the easiest assignment, I think, in the class to do the stories. You should already know how to do the design because we went over that in class. So then the project plan is going to be very simple for those of you who are doing the Agile. Okay. And we're going to go over the enterprise stuff on Wednesday, which means then you can do this portion here if you haven't already. Okay. So then you'll have everything you need to finish the project, okay, early on in the course, which will give you more time to work on it. Okay. So let's go back to the slides here. Now, that's the sprint. Those things happen in the sprint. Now we can use different tooling. Jira is a very prevalent tool for Agile. It has a lot of features. It's got a lot of features. It's also quite complex to use. Okay? So, and it's not free for us to use in the classroom, so we can't actually show it. But you can go out to Jira's website. They're owned by Atlassian. Okay? They own like a chat. I think they own a chat system as well. They own Trello and some other things. But you can go out and you can go do a demo of Jira if you want to go take a look at it. That's what most companies use these days for this purpose. But you also have things like ClickUp, Trello, and Asana, which are project management tools. Yes?
If you have Trello and use Jira, are they together?
They have integration between them, yeah. But Jira integrates with other tools as well, like probably Asana. And actually, I know it integrates with Asana, but not very well because one of my former clients used it. ClickUp is another. So ClickUp, Trello, Asana do the same thing. Okay? And I will show you a demonstration of that here in a minute. And then Microsoft Azure DevOps is something I just learned about this 2 weeks ago from one of my students. Okay? And it's similar to Jira, just from Microsoft instead. Okay. Now before we go into Waterfall, let me show you an example of one of these pieces of software. So let's look at Trello. But again, I don't care what you use. If you can use ClickUp, you can use Trello, you can use Asana, you can use another one called Monday that I didn't write down. Any of these are fine, or you can go the old-fashioned route where you draw it on a whiteboard or something. Okay? I think you can even get an education version of Miro. You could draw it out by hand if you really wanted to. But this allows me to do a Kanban board, a Kanban board. Okay? And in its simplest form, there's a column for to-do, things I need to do, column for doing, and a column for done. Students have been telling me they start using this for their homework. Okay? Very helpful. They didn't have this when I was doing my homework, but I would have used it. Okay? I have used these for job hunting though, and it's a very good way to keep track of things. We start off, we add something to do. We can just drag it over to doing while we're working on it. When we're done, we move it over here. Now for all of you, what you're going to do, if you choose to use software like this, is you're actually going to personalize these columns, okay? And you're going to add some additional columns in here. And I don't remember, right here. We could say sprint to do. And this is stuff we're going to do in the current sprint. So we can take this sprint column here, this one here, and we'll move it here. So this is our backlog. I'm going to go ahead and change this name. So we're going to call this a backlog instead. It's the stuff that we'll get to eventually. It's all the things we know we need to do for the project for all of you. Okay. Each sprint will put things into the to-do column for that sprint when we're doing our planning. Okay. So let's say you're going to work on the user stories. Okay. We know we need to do that. So we'll take it, we'll drag it over here, and we're going to work on it in this sprint. That's an epic, by the way. It's not detailed enough. Okay. What we want to do in order to make that a story is to say, create 5 user stories for the HR system. And then, there, that's a new card. We also want a few more columns because all of you are going to want to keep track of who's doing what. Okay? And there's a couple of different approaches. One is to create columns with each person's name. That's what I call the four-person version. That's what I'm going to do here because we don't have to have accounts for every person. In the real world, what will happen is you'll have your own individual accounts. Everybody will put them in the to-do column, and you'll have your own ID, so your picture will show up on the card itself. Okay? We don't have a paid account, so we can't really do that here. Okay? But that would be how it would be. Then it would show your picture on the card, so everybody can look at a glance and see what everybody's working on. We have fewer columns, which is less stuff to keep track of. For the illustration here, what I'm going to show you is the poor person's version. Okay, so we're going to just put in Johnny and Sally here. Okay, and we're just going to drag them, and we're going to basically get rid of this. We're going to get rid of that one. Okay, So Johnny and Sally have columns for the stuff that we're going to do, okay, that we're working on. The last thing we have is we're going to add a sprint done column because we want to have a place to keep track of things for our retrospective. If we move them to done, we won't be able to keep track of what we did in a sprint, right? We'll just see what everything we've done over time. So we just take this, oops, and we'll move it here. Okay. So now, create 5 user stories. We assign it to Johnny. Johnny's working on it. When Johnny's done, we put it here. At the retrospective, someone goes through here and counts these and documents all these into a report. And when we're done with the report at the retrospective, all of these go into the done column. We're done with them, okay? Now, let's assume that we decided that we didn't have time to work on this after we put it in the sprint. We realized we didn't finish it by the end of the sprint. During the retrospective, what do? We move it back here, okay? And then when we start our planning session, the following, say we started on Monday, the planning session, we do the retrospective on Friday or whatever, right? Well, on Monday, we go and say, can we do it this sprint? And we say, no, we don't really fully understand what this story is yet. We need to break it up further before we can assign it, okay? And we just move these cards between these different things as we do things, okay? And then we end up with the report of what we did in each sprint. This is what you need to do. You should screenshot at the beginning of a sprint, your board, screenshot at the end. So your board is going to have a screen, each week is going to have a screenshot of your board at the front, a screenshot at the end, your retrospective notes of what happened, okay? Your planning notes of what you plan to do, and the updates that your team provided throughout the week. Okay? Each week, that's what you're going to do with Agile, if you choose to do Agile. I think Agile is a lot easier because you don't have to think through every possible scenario up front. When we get to Waterfall here shortly, you're going to realize you have to plan every single thing up front and you can't make any changes to it. Okay? So and there's a lot more paperwork involved with Waterfall. But is anybody here planning to go work for Boeing or Northrop Grumman or one of those big defense contractors? Or federal government? If you are, you do need to learn Waterfall because they don't use Agile. Yeah. Boeing doesn't use it, although maybe you would think that with the 737 MAX or something, I don't know. Yes?
Why do you think they don't use it?
Well, when you're talking something that expensive, you've got to really plan the resources ahead of time and your requirements don't change as often. You know, you're going to decide what that airplane looks like years before you actually start building it. Yeah. All right, so this is Trello. ClickUp similar. Asana is similar as well. Yes?
Are we going to be doing work for this class daily for the rest of the semester? Or required?
The work daily that you're going to do is just post your update to your group. That's it. That literally should take you, as an individual, 15 seconds to post.
Will we have work to do to even post every single day for the rest of the week? For the group project? Or for the rest of the semester?
If you don't, then you didn't work on anything for the project that day. So your update is pretty shallow. It's just, I didn't work on the project today, or didn't work on the project yesterday, I'm not going to work on it today. That sort of thing, yeah. Yeah. I think it's better if you space it out and do a little bit every day. Just, even if you spent 5 minutes on it every day, it's going to make your life a lot easier at the end. You don't have as much work to do. Yeah.
So when should we start the Agile? Because there's some facets of the project that people still don't know about. So I'm not sure if we should all start at the same time, or maybe some of us start a sprint on something, or does everyone have to start a sprint?
Well, your team's going to start I guess you've got to look at it from the perspective of your team. So your team is going to start a sprint whether everybody has work in that sprint or not. That's okay. You don't have to have people have work in every single sprint. There might be a sprint where someone's doing something else, right? But you've got to look at it from the perspective of your team. So you would never have a sprint that is only for you individually. You wouldn't have people start multiple sprints. But by the end of this week, you should know everything you need to know for the project. Yeah, because Wednesday we're going to talk about enterprise systems. And if you have any other questions about the project, that is the time to ask. Okay.
And then we just do sprints until we're finished with the project.
Yeah. When you're done with the project and you've completed your deliverables and you're getting ready to submit it, once you get ready to submit it, you can stop doing sprints. Yeah, because you're done with the project. Yeah. Yes.
Just a quick question regarding project management apps like this. For those hypothetical cases of students that want to manage their homework on these, which one would you recommend?
Well, I go for whatever's free and has the best features and easiest for you to use. I use ClickUp. I think ClickUp's the easiest to use, but other people tell me, students tell me that they think Trello and Asana are easier, right? And Monday's easier than all of them. I didn't even know about Monday until last week. So it's personal preference. I would try them all out. They all have mobile apps. They all have iPad apps and stuff like that. So I would try them all out. Now, if you're going to do it manually, then all that you do is, let's just get rid of this for now. Why am I not finding that? What browser window? Oh, here it is. So if we look at, if we were to do this manually, it would look something like this. Okay? If we were to do it on a whiteboard or something, we could use sticky notes. So we could do something like to do, doing, and done. Okay? And we could have sticky notes, serves the same purpose. Okay? Before this type of software existed, people did this in PowerPoint or Word or things like that. But because none of you sit in an office all day, I don't think that this old-fashioned way is going to be very effective because you all have to be able to share it, right? So I think that software is going to be easier. What I recommend though is if you are going to use one of those software packages, I think that in order to use it for free, you can't have multiple accounts. So what I would do is just create one account and all share the password. So don't use one of your real passwords. You could even set up a new email for that purpose that you all share, okay? And you only use it for the classwork, however you want to handle that. But if you're going to all use the same account, you want to make sure you use a password that none of you care about. Okay? All right. So that's Agile. Now, waterfall. Anybody tell me why it's called waterfall?
You finish one portion of the task and you move on to the next.
Exactly. You're an expert in this, yes. Just like a waterfall. You know, you can't stop midstream on the waterfall and go back up to the top, unless you know how to levitate. Okay? You got to finish going all the way to the bottom, and then you can get out of the water, climb back up, and start over again. Okay. Same basic principle. It's also known as the Systems Development or Software Development Lifecycle, or SDLC. And you have well-defined phases, and you have to perform them in a sequence. So you start with planning, and you do extensive planning. Okay? So using the Boeing example, they do extensive planning of what their customers are looking for in an aircraft or a spacecraft. Then you go into requirements, and you really understand all the requirements for that aircraft or spacecraft, right? Once you define the requirements, you lock the requirements. Nobody can make any changes to them anymore. Okay? Then you go out to the designers and they design the aircraft. Okay. Then once everybody agrees on the design of the aircraft, you lock that. Then you start building the aircraft. That's the implementation phase. Once you get to that point, you don't go back and say, hey, you know what? I love how the windows are round, but wouldn't it be cool if there were no windows at all in there? It's too late. Okay. You go back to the beginning, you start a new project. Okay. And you build a new type of aircraft later on. These projects can take a long time. I hate to give like a rough estimate, but let's just say that maybe 6 months minimum usually for these types of projects. Okay? There's a lot of effort involved. After you've built it, which is the implementation, you have the maintenance. So you have an ongoing operations aspect to the project as well. Okay? And there's a great table in 220 that kind of outlines what this looks like. But with this, you have a formal project management structure. So for a smaller project, you'd have a project manager. Maybe you'd have business analysts and developers and things like that. For a large project, you might have a program manager who's responsible for a lot of smaller projects, or a bunch of project managers underneath them who manage different components of the project. Okay. So large projects would have maybe a program manager, smaller projects just a project manager. This person's job is to just manage the project. They manage resources, but they're not the people's managers. So every time that I've been on a project with a project manager, they're not my manager, they're not my boss. But I'm considered a resource available to them for that project, and so they do track my time and want to know what I'm working on, etc. So with Waterfall, we use what's called a Gantt chart, and I'm going to do a really horrible job here of trying to show you what a Gantt chart looks like, and then I'll show you a real one from the web. Okay. By the way, this board, if you're using this Miro thing, it's infinitely scalable. If you can't find something, just go down here and zoom out, and you'll see the whole board with everything on it. Okay, it's like we have an unlimited whiteboard in the classroom now. Okay, so you can go zoom in on it and take screenshots if you want to capture it. Okay. All right, so a Gantt chart looks something along the lines like this. Okay, we've got this document, and it's kind of broken up like this, and we'll have a task and subtask. Okay, and another task and subtask. And then there'll be a person assigned to it. So let's say Jim and Sue. I know people are really not named that anymore. Right? Those are older names. I don't want to offend anybody by using people's names in the class. Okay. Now we also know, say, a start date and an end date. Okay, so we're going to start on January 1st and we're going to end on January 5th. And Sue is going to start on January 6th and end on January 10th. Okay. We can also have a dependency. So if these were numbered, they'd be numbered something like this. Okay? And what this means is I can have a dependency. Well, that's the first task. There's no dependencies. But I can say that Sue's task is dependent on completing 1.1. That will automatically set the dates to be after Jim's task, okay, which is 1.1. So we don't have to manually manage the schedule anymore. We can have it automatically done through software, using Microsoft Project, Smartsheet, ClickUp, and those companies have similar software that can do this capability. The last part here is the Gantt chart portion, okay? And we've got these bars that indicate on a schedule of the calendar year. Okay, this is the calendar of all the year, months and days and whatever of the year. We have these graphical bars that show how long something's going to take and overlap. Okay? Then we can see conflicts, and we can visually see how the project's progressing over time, because as we complete tasks, it shades things in to show that they're complete, okay? So as a project manager, I can walk into a meeting with this and show it on the screen, and everybody can see where the status of the project is, okay? I can also give it to the executives, and they can see that as well, okay? So this can be very helpful. How many of you have worked for a restaurant or something where they did scheduling on something like this? They use similar to a Gantt chart where they put your names and then they draw out bars for who's covering the shifts. Okay? I have. Okay? And I didn't know it was called a Gantt chart. Okay? But it's kind of like running a project. It's the same basic principles. These have been around for a long time. So we use these to track tasks. We can also run reports off from it to tell us resource utilization. So I might be able to see that, you know, Jim's only supposed to be working 40 hours a week, but as a project manager, I can run a report and see he's assigned 80 hours a week of tasks. That's a problem. My project's going to fail. So early on, I can look at it and say, oh, well, Jim's oversubscribed. We need another resource, and I can use that data to management to go and say, we need to hire someone else to fill in so Jim doesn't have as much work to do. So it allows us to plan things out in advance. And as we progress through, we either sit down in a meeting with the project manager as a smaller group, and the project manager asks for updates, and then they're typing it into the Gantt chart, right? Or they're asking for updates via email, and then they go and do it on their own time, and then they come into a meeting and we review the status. It depends on the project manager. But we have to do these in order to do the waterfall method so we can plan it out. And each one of those phases, which would be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, are the ones I just showed on the previous slide. Okay. So this is a Gantt chart. All right. Oh, let me show you a real one, okay, from someone who is not a terrible artist. Here's a good one. There we go. Okay. So we have the different phases. We have the tasks underneath it. We can have subtasks. Okay. We have resources assigned. We have completion progress. We see dependencies. These are checkpoints. Okay. So we've frozen the design. We've frozen the requirements, whatever they might be. We can visually see all this information, which is very helpful to us. So, how many of you want to do the waterfall method? Yeah,
Where
question?
does it show on there the dates, other than like?
Oh, so there's a view that they've got the columns turned off, but the dates would be here, dependencies would be here, resources. To show it on here, they've consolidated that information here, but normally you would have it here and here. Yeah. Because these things print off on really long pieces of paper for each set of tasks, so printing them can be kind of a problem. Does anybody think that you want to do waterfall as a group? Okay. Waterfall is going to involve you have to do a lot of other things. Okay. In addition to doing the Gantt chart and stuff, you have to come up with your project plan. I would show some examples of that, but if you're not going to do it, you have to do a lot of narratives around the project, talk about the risks, do risk management. You have to define all your requirements up front, which you probably don't know. So project management on waterfall is a lot more work. But in a high-risk environment, it lowers the risk. Okay? Boeing doesn't want to invest $1 billion on building an airplane, and not knowing every possible scenario up front. Or they end up with maps where they're having to fix a lot of things. All right. Anybody had to fly on one of those before they got grounded? I got lucky. Like, I was supposed to fly in one, and then they grounded it like the next day, and they moved me to some other aircraft. I was so lucky. All right. Couple tools: Microsoft Project and Smartsheet. Okay. And for the planning, the first thing we do at planning is we define the problems that our organization faces, which is what all of you have to do for your project. Okay? You have to think about the problems, and you may not know all the problems, so this is where you get to have creative liberties. I've given you some ideas of some of the issues, okay? And you can go and investigate that further on your own to see what that means. What does it mean if a company has antiquated software? What options might be available, that sort of thing, okay? What if they don't have social media? What could you do there? You're going to identify what the problems are for the organization. Then you're going to really look at the current and future needs for the system. So why would you develop a system or purchase a system? When I say develop here, I also mean purchase. Okay? You can just buy an off-the-shelf system. Who are the users of the system? Are you using a new system? Are you planning to upgrade the old system? What departments of the organization will use the system? Okay? If it's a marketing system, yes, marketing is an obvious customer, but are there other customers in the organization who would use it? How long will it take to deploy a system? You may not know that. You may not know the answer to that, but you'll have to do your best effort to guess on that. What capabilities do you need in the system? So if it's a financial system, what capabilities? If it's an HR system, I can tell you right now, you don't want to get sued again, okay? But I'll also tell you, don't worry about the lawsuit. Like, the lawsuit's already happened, so you're not going to be able to fight that $10 million, whatever it is. Don't worry about that. Don't fight the hypothetical, okay? It's a sunk cost. But how do you prevent it from happening in the future? You can't control that. Okay? You could come up with good HR processes and policies and come up with a good HR system that would help mitigate that from happening in the future. Okay? What kind of capabilities do you need? And then you would form a task force of internal and external users. So if it's a system that might have external customers on it or suppliers, then you're going to want to have external users as well. If it's just an internal system like, say, HR, then maybe just internal people. I will say this. If you're building something that prospective employees are going to use, say candidates for a job, you probably want to get their input, okay? And I use this example of Taleo. Taleo, has anybody used Taleo to apply to a job? What was your experience with it?
How to format your resume pretty annoyingly.
Yes. It's painful. And I know a lot of people who work for Taleo, and really great people. But they're constrained by an organization that really doesn't seem to want to improve that product at all. Because if they did, they would actually solicit input from people like you and I who apply to jobs. Okay? So that's an example of an HR system that you would want external people to look at. And so maybe you would go through your pool of people who recently applied and say, hey, we're trying to improve our HR processes. What would you recommend? You know, what did you like about our system? What did you hate about our system? Well, you know, you may not have any system at all. So what would you want in a system? You have those conversations with the user, okay? And then you get their input. So if you hated the fact that you had to do your resume that way, I did too. My resume's already there. Why do I have to re-enter it, right? Doesn't make sense. So you would try to improve that experience. Another aspect of what you might look at is at the end, you have to sign all these things for diversity and disabled and veteran status and stuff. Why do I have to sign on the same page, enter my name 5 times for each one of those forms? Why do I have to select a date? It's a computer. It knows the current date. It knows when I submit it what the date is. So why do I have to go in and click and select the date for each one of those forms? This is a usability issue. This could easily be addressed. Okay? But no one's bothered to talk to people who actually use the system. They just go out and they buy a system. Okay? This is an example of the IT department putting a system out there that doesn't work for the users. Okay? It happens all the time. Okay? So we want to be able to get that input from other people. During the planning, we also look at is it economically viable? Right? If we have $50 million of revenue and we have a system that's going to cost us $100 million, it's not viable. Okay? So why even bother with it if it's not going to be viable? There are times we have to say, you know what? We can't afford this. We're going to have to come up with some other solution. Is it technically feasible? I don't know. But do we have the technical capabilities to actually make this system happen? And if the answer is no, we either have to get those capabilities or say we need to come up with something else. Is it operationally feasible? Is it going to change the way we operate so much that it's going to cause us to lose business? I'll give you a good example. Years ago, I begrudgingly had to go to Sleep Number and buy a bed. Right? And they were going through an upgrade of their system. And they hadn't operationalized the system yet. So they couldn't even take orders at their stores, the one in Temecula. Nobody could take orders. What they had to do was write it down on a piece of paper because they couldn't get it to work. And they lost the order like 3 times. Okay. Then when they finally placed the order, they placed it twice and charged me twice. Because they hadn't operationalized like the feasibility of it. They rolled it out, but nobody could use it. Okay. The schedule feasibility, if you need a major system and you think, oh, you know, this is a piece of cake, we'll have it ready next month. Look at the feasibility of your schedule. Be realistic. If you need something next month, then you're probably not going to go out and build something brand new. Okay? You're probably going to go buy something off the shelf and just cross your fingers that it's going to work for you. The last thing is legal feasibility. There are a lot of laws that apply. We haven't covered this yet. We'll cover it at the end of the semester. But there are a lot of laws that apply, and they impact how we have to do our systems. We can't build a system here in the U.S., put all the data here in the U.S. for our European customers. We're not allowed to do that. The law prevents it. So we have to look at the legal feasibility of a system. If we're going to buy one system and put it here in the U.S., and we have European customers, European employers, or employees and European suppliers, guess what? We're breaking the law, and we can't do that. So we have to look at the feasibility in that aspect. After we planned it out, we said, okay, we know what we want, we know what we need. We've talked to people to kind of get an understanding of we're all on the same line and the same vision. Then we start doing the requirements, okay? And so for the requirements, we have 2 major types. We have functional and non-functional, okay? How many of you have the Miro app or the Miro thing up on your device? Anybody? Just a couple? Okay, I'm gonna just pull it up then here. So we're gonna talk about functional and non-functional, but I think it's gonna be helpful to visualize this with me using the whiteboard here. Okay. So we've got, oops. Functional and non-functional, and hopefully this battery will work. Okay, so functional requirements are things like for a payroll system, would be things like processing direct deposits. Would be a functional requirement. I'm not writing it very well in the interest of space, but processing direct deposits would be a type of functionality that we want to be able to have. We want to be able to have a pay stub, okay? We want people to be able to change their W-4 withholdings, okay? We want them to be able to, have multiple bank accounts maybe, okay? These are all potentially functional requirements. They affect the functionality of the system, okay? So these would be functional. These are functional. Now, non-functional would be things like this. Things like must support 1,000 users. That's a capacity requirement. It's a non-functional requirement. It doesn't affect the functionality of the system, but we want it to support that number of users. Another one would be help desk, Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And that's another type of non-functional requirement. That's around support for the system. Another one would be availability. So we would say system must be available 99.99% of the year. What that means is then whatever that number is in terms of availability of the number of hours in a day per year of how much time that system has to be available. Okay. That's a non-functional requirement. Doesn't affect the functionality of it, doesn't change how anything looks, it just means we have to consider that. A lot of times we consider the functional requirements and we don't think about the non-functional. Okay. And this gives me a problem for say the payroll example, okay? Companies, let me ask this question a different way. What do you think the most important operation in a company is? Like the most important thing that you do in a company? Pay your employees, right? If you don't pay your employees, we'll be pretty pissed at you, okay? So payroll is probably the most important business process in a company. So if you build a payroll system and you don't think about availability or capacity, what happens when you try to run a payroll for, say, 1,000 people and it craps out because you forgot to put that as a requirement? Okay? People don't get paid, people get pissed off. Okay? So you want to consider these non-functional requirements as well. They're not the cool things that people are going to talk about or think about, but they're very important nonetheless. Okay? So we have functional and non-functional requirements in any system. Some other ones like security requirements, compliance, regulations, that sort of thing. Okay? But we have those two basic types. So a functional requirement defines the function and the specific results. So here's an example. The system must do X. So the system must provide a mechanism that enables a user to create a new employee record from a mobile device. That would be a very good requirement because a requirement needs to be detailed enough that a developer can look at the requirements document and understand what you're talking about. And there are a lot of other tools you use in addition to just the written requirement in order to enable a developer to do that. Okay? If I go and say the system must be fast, and you're the developer, what do you build?
It depends on my definition of fast.
Exactly, right?
Maybe I'll build a fast car, and that's your system for that.
I picked on you because you told me about cars. That's why I picked that example. Yeah. So yeah, if I don't specify, then it's up to the developer to go figure it out. Now let's just assume you went down that route and you built a car like a Corvette for me, right? But I wanted a van to transport packages. Okay? You didn't give me what I wanted. I asked for transportation, and you gave me a Corvette, and I've got all these packages I need to deliver. It didn't work for me, right? So that's why it's very important to be very specific about what you're looking for. Okay? The less a developer has to come back and get clarification, the better, because you can plan better, you can budget better. So in this case, I'm very clear that the system has to, by saying must, that's an absolute requirement. We don't get to say, oh, we'll punt it down the road and worry about it later. We absolutely must do this. We have to allow a user to create a new employee from a mobile device. That's a feature we think is very important, okay? Non-negotiable. The non-functional ones are what I mentioned before. The system shall maintain availability. You could say the system must. Nothing wrong with that. Right? But shall is less powerful than must. So if we had to deprioritize something, we could deprioritize that. If we say the system could, then we could deprioritize it even further to a very low requirement. And that's what happens. So you really word these in a way that if it's a must, you're not going to shy away from doing it. It's something you're absolutely going to do. A shall, you definitely would like it to do that. Or could, doesn't really matter so much. And a couple examples here, the availability and then the comply with GDPR laws. So when we gather the requirements, first we do the definition of a system. We're going to find we need a payroll system and we need it to support, X number of employees. Yes.
I was just gonna ask, the shall with regard to GDPR laws, that's because that's a supporting requirement, not because it's optional, right?
It's not, certainly not
It's-
optional if
but
my
it's-
company is dealing with that type of data. Yeah.
Okay.
So
So.
it will depend on your, I use it as an example, but it's not necessarily, it could be must comply depending on your business, those types of things.
We label it as a non-functional requirement in this case because it's.
It doesn't affect the
supporting the actual
functionality.
functionality.
Yeah. If you had to support something like, within GDPR, if you had to have the ability to export data, which is a requirement of GDPR. So you could still have requirements in the system associated with GDPR that are functional requirements.
Yep.
So GDPR and CCPA, by the way, the California version, have a requirement that you be able to get the user's data upon request. Now, there's no requirement that you build an automated mechanism, by the way. You just have to have a mechanism to get that data. You might decide that you don't want your employees spending all that time getting that data for people. You want to automate the process, so then you would build functionality into the system, a functional set of requirements for the GDPR stuff. Yeah. So you can have it into both areas. But GDPR in general is a compliance regulation, so it doesn't affect functionality, but it could affect it.
Okay.
Now requirements, what you do is, there's a number of different ways. You can do user interviews, okay? So I can sit down and say, well, I'll pick on you because you're in front here. What would you like the payroll system to do, right? And then you start telling me what you want that to do. That's one way. Another way is for me to evaluate existing systems. So I sit down and I start digging into the existing payroll system. I have someone in payroll show me how they do their job, and I kind of make a lot of notes, and I sit there. That's another way of doing it. Another way is to go out and broadly get user stories from people, and that's what we're going to work on as an exercise today. Is we're going to go out and figure out user stories. So we go talk to people. We don't necessarily do like formal interviews. We don't do a formal meeting or anything, but we go out and we talk to people. So as an example, when I've done this in more advanced classes, what I'll do is I'll have the students and say, okay, you've got to come up with 50 user stories for the registration system. And so they have to go out to their version of the student union and stand there with the clipboard and ask people to write stories on a notebook card or note card of what that system should do, okay? You talk to the people who actually are using the system. Now, for that example, it's easy to think of students, but what about faculty? You should talk to faculty as well. What are your other users? Staff. Right? Some systems on the campus might also have community users who are not a faculty, staff, or student, but they might use the system as well. So you have to think about all the possible users, not just one. And a lot of times we tend to think of our own area. So let's say I'm a finance person. I'm going to think about the finance requirements for the finance system. Anybody here supply chain? You're going to be thinking about the supplier aspects of that, right? The supply chain. Your requirements for a financial system are going to be vastly different than what the finance people have. So if now we've got the finance, I'm not really finance, by the way, you guys all know that, but I'm the finance person, you're the supply chain people. How many of you are HR managers or management in general? Okay? A few of you. So the HR managers or the managers are going to have a different viewpoint on what that system should have. Okay? MIS people. Should be a lot more people in the room now. Okay? MIS people, you're going to have your viewpoint of what the system should do. If we all come together and all define parts of the requirements, we're going to have a much better system than if one person or one group does it. Okay? So if we go get user stories from all the groups, that's good. Another thing we do is we think about what do the new web pages look like? What would forms look like? What would a database query look like? What type of reports do we need to have? Then we start thinking about, as part of this whole process, we think about what kind of functionality. Okay, we got an existing system, great. What are the problems with an existing system we don't like? And we start documenting the things that we would want to change about it. Okay? Now, when we get to the feasibility step, we might realize it's not feasible to change, right? But right now, there's no bad ideas. So when you're doing user stories, as long as it's a good, like, it explains it well, don't worry about, oh, that's a stupid idea. There should be no stupid ideas at that point, okay? Just think about user stories as a way to just brain dump a lot of really good ideas. We'll go back and prioritize and realize that maybe these are duplicates and stuff like that later. The key thing is to come up with unique user stories, and then you'll prioritize them later. And I'll tell you how you can prioritize them a little later. You've got to think about security. From the very beginning, security is not an afterthought. Historically, it has been. Okay? And then we end up with systems where we have security breaches. So if we think about it as part of the requirements, then we're more likely to build security in from the very beginning, and it's part of the DNA of the system. Okay? The data model. So data model looks like this. Okay? And so data models allow us to model the way that inputs and outputs happen. So a data model is not quite the same as an ER diagram, okay? But the data model would be like this. So this is my user, okay? They're happy. And they go to a web page and they input. So we're basically mapping inputs and outputs. So they input their name, email, whatever. That goes to our CRM database. Okay? Let me make that more into a database. Okay? And then the output that they get back, so they then get an output back to the web page of their record. Okay, so this is their output. That would be a very simple data model for a simple website interaction. Okay? We talk about like a payroll system. Okay? With a payroll system, we have more interactions. So we might have a user, finance user input. Okay? And that might be salary, hours, whatever. Okay? That's an input into the system. Then our output might be a pay stub with current pay on it or something. Okay? With a data model here, we are looking at the data flows. Oops, that's output, not outflow. We look at data flows. Now, this also means we build things like ER diagram. Okay? So then we start building our own ER diagram for whatever system. So you're going to do that as well. Okay? You're going to do things like let's see here, ER diagram. Let's say a payroll system. Okay, we're going to have employee information. We're going to probably have things like department. We're probably going to have things like pay history. Okay. We're going to build out all these tables and we're going to build the relationships. These are made up relationships, by the way. They may not be correct. You're going to do this as part of your project as well. Now, you don't have to do all the systems. Pick one. Payroll, finance, HR, I don't care. Pick it, draw a diagram. You can go look at examples online, but what you create needs to be your own work. Okay? I can easily do a reverse image search and see if you copied it off Google. You don't want to fail the class over something stupid like that. Okay? Just do something. You can use other ones as examples, though. Okay? But I want to see that you know how to do it. You can do it by hand like I did here. Just make sure it's clear to read. Don't use my example as doing it kind of quickly here. You can also use Lucidchart and other tools like that. Okay? For this class, it doesn't matter so much. If you're in 411, I told you to use Lucidchart because it generates a SQL for it. It doesn't matter for this class. Lucidchart. I'll write it on the thing. Lucidchart. There you go. Okay. And then the last thing here is whenever you're building any type of system, we consider the 5 components. So at the beginning, the first class, well, the second class for you guys, we talked about the 5 component model. It's not in the book. Okay? So we talked about hardware, software, data, procedures, and people. And you've got to consider that for the requirements as well. There are going to be people requirements. There are going to be process requirements. There are going to be data requirements. There are going to be software requirements, and there will be hardware requirements. Okay? Those hardware requirements, by the way, might just be cloud-based systems, or you might have the software and hardware combined into a cloud-based system. Okay? But overall, you're going to have things from those 5 categories. Okay? Oops. Okay. So one way to do the requirements is a user interview. So I sit down face to face with you and I ask you about your job and what you want out of the system. That's one way. We go and we analyze the data offline, I draft requirements, I create use cases which are step-by-step. So a use case is a step-by-step. I'm going to talk about user stories and use cases and everybody gets confused. Okay? A user story is a very simple phrase or sentence of the system must allow credit cards to be processed. That's a user story perhaps. Okay? A use case is very detailed for say that particular user story. It's attached to a user story. And it could be like, step 1, user opens web browser. Step 2, they go to our website. Step 3, they log in with their username and password. That might form another whole user story of how do you handle usernames and passwords. Okay. Step 4, they enter their credit card information. Step 5, we send a request to Visa. Step 6, they get a response back and we authorize the purchase. Step 7, we ship the product, whatever it might be. Okay. The use case is a very detailed step-by-step of what the user would do to perform that action. Between the user story, the use cases, data flow diagrams, and then the ER diagrams, that ought to give a developer a very good picture of what to build for you, okay, with all those things. After you get all those things together, you sit down with the user that you talk to, and you make sure that you understood the requirements. This process does take a long time, by the way, so this isn't something you do overnight. Once you sit down and you make sure that everything's good, you might go back and revise it and come back to them. Eventually you get approval of the requirement and everything else that's associated with it, okay? So that could be one avenue. Another avenue is a survey. We all get surveys to fill out. We have people fill out a survey, we get their data, etc. This is less effective. People might write things and we may not understand what they're writing. Whereas if we have a conversation, a lot of times communication is a lot easier face to face. I can get on a whiteboard with you, and by the way, I'm a big proponent of remote work, so by face to face, I don't mean you have to stand in the room with them. I just mean you need to have that face to face, real time conversation, and we can use tools like this these days to have conversations. Okay. So, a big proponent of you don't have to be standing in the same room as them. But a survey is an asynchronous method where they write some things up and maybe I'll understand it, maybe I won't. I'll probably spend a lot more time trying to go back and understand what they were talking about. If I just sat down in front of them and had a face-to-face conversation, it probably would have been a little bit easier. Now, another one here is a meeting where I bring a larger community together. So maybe I bring a representative from every department together. Maybe I bring everybody in finance together, right? And we sit down and we whiteboard ideas. Okay? So what usually will happen is, I don't want to get sick, so I'm going to use my own marker here. Okay, so we might just sit down and we just start saying, maybe sticky notes or whiteboard or whatever, but let's say I'm building a car, okay? So I'm building a car, needs to have doors, okay? Must be fast. We're just putting ideas down, okay? Must have internet. And we just start putting these ideas down. Then what happens is we start putting them into categories. So interior might be a category, exterior might be another one, engine might be another, okay? And then after we do that and we categorize what they go into, we can prioritize them. So the way I prioritize is there's a number of different ways, but as an example, currency talks, okay? So usually, one way you can do is just monopoly money, right? It doesn't matter what denomination it is, it's all worth one. Okay? This is one vote. So if I had 5 of these, I could vote all 5 of my votes for this requirement, if I wanted to, okay? Or I can split them up however I want. And the ones that get the most votes overall are the ones that we're gonna focus on as a highest priority. And then we're gonna go and say these votes that are lower are gonna be our next priority, etc. That's one way. Another way is to do voting through some other mechanism. So Jira has an ability to vote for your favorite stories that are in Jira. So you can go and click a vote, and each person gets 1 vote for, like they get a currency of some sort. How it's defined, I don't remember, but you get a certain number of votes per person, and you can use that to decide what you want to work on and what the priority is. Okay? And so if something gets 100 votes and something else gets 2 votes, then the one that gets 100 votes is going to be the priority for the organization. This is very good when you have people who are very vocal from different departments. You get everybody together. Now the problem is getting everybody together can be challenging. Okay? So sometimes you need to move quickly, you bring some people together. You could bring in a couple people from each department, okay? But then you get everybody together, you have a couple facilitators, not just one person probably, but you have some helpers for someone like me. Okay? You can get through that all those requirements, you get them written down, and that can really help to speed up the process. Okay? All right, so user stories, what we can do and what you all are going to do here before we leave is on a piece of paper, you're going to think through with your group some user stories for a particular system that company is facing. So an HR system, a finance system. What would be some user stories you can come up with? I'm going to show you some examples here in just a second, and then we'll get into that exercise. We can categorize them by functional, non-functional, and then within functional, non-functional, the types. So like for an HR system, we'd have recruitment, firing, hiring, performance management, payroll, etc. Okay? Might have different categories. Same with non-functional, but they're generally into those types of categories there. If money was no object and time was no object, we had infinite of both, then we wouldn't have to prioritize. The reality is we have to prioritize, just like everything in life. So that's where the currency comes in. Now, a user story is a high-level requirement that provides just enough information to allow a developer to estimate how long it's going to take to implement. Now, we have a conversation with our stakeholders, which might be a customer, might be an internal person, etc. But think of these as the smallest work unit. A story should be a single task that can be completed in one sprint. If it's longer than that, it's actually an epic, and we'll break it down further later on. Okay? Don't worry about so much of, is it an epic or is it a story? When you're coming up with your stories, try your best to come up with what you think are stories. I am not going to mark you wrong if it's actually an epic, okay, for this class. If you take the design class, then yeah, that'll be an issue. But for this basic class, you don't need to worry about it. Okay? You don't know yet. But as you progress through the program, if you're MIS, you'll get better at this and better estimation. Even things I think are a story, and I've been in the field over 20 years, things I think are a story may not be actually a story as I dive into it more in depth. And I realize, oh, that's more than 1 week of work or 2 weeks of work. So here's an example. Each one of these is a story. So there's 8 stories here. Students can purchase monthly parking passes online. That's one story. Parking passes can be paid via credit cards. That's another story. Parking passes can be paid via PayPal. That's another story. What is not a story is if we say parking passes can be paid via credit cards, PayPal, e-check, cash, TikTok, Slack chat. I don't know all the different things you can pay for things with these days. Okay. We want to have it individually. Okay. Professors can input student grades. You can tell this was from another country because we don't call them marks here. We don't call them seminars and stuff like that. Okay? But these are all stories that a developer can then use to develop the actual application or find an existing application. Because remember, it's not just developing new things, it's just finding things online. Okay?
So we're using like Visa and then using MasterCard or like are those 2 separate stories?
No, I would consider the credit
So you would
cards,
just do
I would
credit
do
card.
story, debit card, and debit and credit cards are treated really the same way.
Okay.
But like checks are completely different how you would have to develop that.
Okay.
Cash is another way. PayPal is a completely different way. Like you don't do this same thing for any of those. But credit card and debit card, usually it's just one form for all of them, so it doesn't really matter. Here's some tools. We can use index cards, a piece of paper. You're going to use a piece of paper in class today. Okay? Now, here's the cool part, right? For those of you who actually come to class. And those of you who are listening to this, it sucks to not come to class. But everybody who turns it in with your names on it, okay, will get extra credit. Okay? So a benefit of coming to class. What you're going to do is write some user stories. Now, hopefully you can work in your group because it'll help you through project if you were to do that. Okay? If your group's not here though, you can work individually based on what you think you need for your group. Okay? You're going to turn those in. So if you want to keep that information, take a picture before we leave. Okay? Now, for this exercise, focus on functional. For the project, focus on functional. Okay? You can have non-functional ones, but for the 30, they need to be functional. Okay? They're harder to come up with when they're functional. Non-functional are easy. Okay? So, yeah, I know that you can come up with say that the system needs 1,000 users, but that's pretty easy to come up with. Think about the functionality. Okay? You do not need to prioritize them for this class, okay? So you don't need to worry about that. Just come up with the 30 user stories. Okay? They can be informal. So they can be something as simple as students can purchase parking passes. Very informal language. Right? It's just a phrase. Or they can be very formal. As a student, I want to purchase a parking pass so that I can drive to school. Okay? It doesn't matter how you write them for this class. Other classes it will, but this class no. So they can be either formal or informal. You do not need to give them an identifier. I just need to know that there are 30 in the final document that you submit. Okay? All right. You don't need to prioritize for this class. Talked about epics. So the way that this works with any type of system is you start having ideas, you create stories, you have conversations with the stakeholders, and then you start going through and doing the work and burning them down, right? But as you burn them down, new ones come in, people come up with new ideas, and those get fed in, so you're constantly getting more and burning them down, and getting more and burning them down in an agile situation where you're going in that loop. Right? Even when it's going live, and it's gone live, we've released it, your users are still creating stories for enhancements, right? Or fixes. Okay. For this class, all you need to do is the stories themselves. But it might be helpful for some things to draw out a sketch, which is called a wireframe. So you can do like a rough UI sketch if you've got an idea of how it should look. Because it's kind of hard to visually depict something just in writing. So if you have an idea for what the interface might look like, you can sketch it out on your document. Okay? You can submit these. It's going to be appendix to your regular project paper, right? So Word or PDF. Someone submitted an open document, by the way, ODT file. I just assumed that you did it and gave credit. I won't do that again. You've got to use Word or PDF. Right? I can't open ODT files. Technically, I think I can open Pages files, but they don't work very well with Career Courses. So try to do Word or PDF. Okay? So I don't know who that was, but make sure you export to Word or PDF. You could do process flows as well in these requirements if you want, in these stories, but not required for this class. It would be helpful if you kind of thought about the theme that they fit into. That would be very helpful. And then we're not going to do use cases for this class. So you can breathe a sigh of relief, but a use case would be after you write a story, what are the steps that a person would go through in order to do that activity? Okay. And that's what they look like. So for enrolling in a class, student inputs their name and number, blah, 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 all those steps that happen. Okay. Okay. Design, we do data flows, we do mock-ups and prototypes. There's an example there of what prototypes look like. Okay. Lucidchart's a tool that you can sign up for as a student for free. And you can do diagrams, flow charts, all that kind of cool stuff. You can even do mock-ups of iPhone apps and stuff like that. Okay. Implementation, we acquire software, we hire people, we train people, we do additional planning and designing, we do the coding, the testing, we make sure it's secure, and we do the data protection as part of the implementation. Okay. We can have different implementation types. So parallel, we have an old system, we've got our new system. We run them both simultaneously. We enter a transaction in this one, we enter a transaction in this one. I went to a gas station down in Carmel Valley a while ago, and they had 2 cash registers. Person rings up my purchase on one, then goes and rings it up on the second one. But they only charged me with one of them. And that was because they were in the process of converting their system and they chose the parallel conversion. Okay? Another approach is phased in, phased out, where an application can be broken up into modules, say payroll and finance and general ledger and all this. Then you do a phased in approach. You do this piece and then this piece and this piece. Right? A plunge conversion is very risky. Basically, we shut down the old system nobody's using anymore. We have a new system we're going to start using. Right? It can be quite risky. Another thing is pilot, where we do it in a small department, and once that's good and we're satisfied with it, we move it on to the rest of the company. Okay? Sometimes we use RFPs to procure software or to bid on software, mostly government organizations, but some larger companies have been known to use them from time to time. Okay? And maintenance. This is just after it's operational, we might do enhancements, we might analyze the performance and make changes. And then I talked about Agile and Kanban already. Service-oriented architecture or microservices is where we break an application down into very small components, and we build very small, what are called microservices, that do a very specific task, and that's all that they do. And then we can build a bunch of these tasks and integrate them together, which means if we want to change something, we only have to change a little bit of the system. Okay? Rapid application development, we try to develop things much more rapidly. Extreme programming, this is where you sit down and you have one computer, 2 people sitting in front of the computer, and they're both actively developing and they're helping each other. I personally don't get it. I don't. A lot of startups are doing that for some reason. Okay? I don't know if it's just a fad or not. I have no idea. But it's kind of a weird thing to think that you are both sharing the same computer and you're both writing code at the same time and you're working. I just don't know how that actually solves any problems. But it is a kind of something that's going on right now. Okay. And that is it. So now, take the last little bit of class. I know some of you need to go, but why don't you go ahead and do 2 user stories apiece. If you're working in a group, each person come up with 2 user stories in your group. Write them down on a piece of paper with your names. Make sure it's legible though, so I know who you are. Okay. And you can turn it in with the minutes over there, and you can get extra credit. Oh, and one other thing. I'll get your question in just a second. MIS Society, if you attend their meetings, let them know, because they report back to me on extra credit for attending the MIS Society meetings. Second of all, if you're not a senior, they really need officers for the MIS Society. So if you're interested, it's a great way to get leadership experience. Okay, so talk to the MIS Society at their next meeting or email them. They've got a website. Okay, your question.
You can use the same paper, right?
You can use the same paper, just make sure everybody's names are on it. Yeah, and just put it in the pile with the minutes.
Yeah.